In today's episode, today in World War II, April 10th, British dive bombers bag a German cruiser. The First Battle of Narvik takes place. This round goes to the Germans. The Japanese begin the infamous Bataan Death March. The Soviet Third Ukrainian Front liberates Odessa after a 907-day occupation. And finally, in the day of the Great Jet Massacre, Allied forces shoot down a poop load of German jets, leading to the abandonment of the defense of Berlin. Let's get started. Okay, so on April 10th, 1940, the fleet armed their dive bombers, the Skuas, actually sank a German cruiser, the Konigsberg, in Bergen. Okay. So, why is this significant? Well, it was actually the first of many ships in World War II which would be sunk by dive bombers. It was the very first major warship to be sunk by dive bombing in the war. I find that fascinating because you think about it, you don't, when you think of the Royal Navy's fleet or air arm, when I look at when I read about other battles, especially the Mediterranean, now of course this is 1940, the Mediterranean comes later, but usually it's the swordfish, those rickety biplane torpedo planes that do the most damage and their airstrikes from the fleet. If you look at Toronto Harbor in 1941, a lot of that damage was done with the swordfish torpedo planes. You very rarely hear about the dive bombers taking out a ship in the Royal Navy. So the fact that the very first major warship to be sunk by dive bombers, I thought you would think that it would be the Japanese, but actually no, it was the British. So good for them. And frankly, um, I don't know if the Skua would hold up to the Val as far as performance capabilities and so forth. But to each their own. And on this day, they had a very good day. We're going to stay in Norway here, April 10th, 1940. The First Battle of Narvik happened, and this was where the Germans attacked Narvik initially. Because, obviously, logically, if there's a first Battle of Narvik, there must be a second coming. Well, we're talking about the first one here. And in this one, 10 German destroyers were attacked in the fjord by five British destroyers. So, the Brits were at a 2-to-1 disadvantage. So, two German destroyers were sunk, 11 merchant ships were sunk, and one supply ship was sunk. And I think the two British destroyers were lost. So if you look at it from a 1-to-1, I mean from a just a strictly how many ships were sunk and how versus how many ships, how many did you lose and how many did the enemy lose, then I think you see the Brits won this one. But I said in my introduction that I think the Germans won this one because all that matters is that the Germans took Narvik. Okay. Your losses, your tactical losses don't necessarily mean that much if you get your strategic goal, which is to take whatever you're going for. In this case, the Germans did take Narvik, and as you know, Narvik was the main port to ship the Swedish iron ore to Germany, to their war-making factories, and so that was always the prize. It reminds me of the Battle of Coral Sea that's going to be happening in a month, a little over a month, or right around a month in off of Australia, where in the battle, the Japanese actually tactically won the battle, but the Americans won the battle because they stopped the invasion of Port Moresby. So that's why I'm trying to illustrate this, that, yes, the British sunk more destroyers, more merchant ships, and as opposed to what they lost, but they lost the battle because the Germans took Narvik. Speaking of the Japanese, on April 10th, 1942, one of the most heinous examples of mass murder that the Japanese ever did in World War II started today. Uh, they probably were not expecting 76,000 troops, captives, POWs on Bataan. Most of them were captured at the because they had been driven down to the tip of the Bataan Peninsula. They did not send trucks or put them on in boxcars. They decided to march them 25 miles to Balanga to get further transport. Okay. They were not given any water, any food, or any medical supplies. And it was a gauntlet of bayoneting, rifle butts to the head, forcing American and Filipinos to dig their own graves and be buried alive. All these things would happen. It's called the Bataan Death March. And, you know, I'm just going to say this again. I feel no regret that we dropped the bombs, atomic bombs on the Japanese. It stopped the war, and they did not deserve, sorry, after their conduct in China, where they killed millions of Chinese as well. I think we're okay with that decision. I really do. On April 10th, 1944, the Soviet Third Ukrainian Front finally liberates Odessa. The Nazis occupied Odessa for about 907 days. It was a big deal. Um, Odessa traditionally was a very Jewish city, so you can imagine how many Jews were lost, sent to or I don't think we've been sent to the concentration camps. Usually in the Ukraine, they just put them outside the city and shot them. But it was it's quite an achievement. Yes, driving the Germans and Nazis out of their homeland. The Soviets were really good, and it was a good day for them. And finally, on April 10th, 1945, this was called the day of the Great Jet Massacre. Allied fighters shot down 30 of 52 Me-262 jet fighters. That's a good day if you think about it, because you have piston airplanes going against jets. I guess the equivalent would be if you had uh, I don't know, biplanes going up against a P-51 Mustang. That would be kind of like a comparison of this. And it's amazing that those biplanes, quote unquote, our piston engine fighters were able to take out such a huge proportion of jet aircraft who could, they were like almost 200 miles an hour faster. But they did, and it was one of the final blows to the Luftwaffe, and they had to abandon their defense of Berlin. So no more fighter cover. Even jet fighters could not cover Berlin anymore. Well, I can't cover this anymore, so I'm going to stop my video right now. So I will say thank you very much for watching. I appreciate it, and I will get you one tomorrow.